Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to give you an overview of the board's approach to occupational disease clusters. I was going to start with explaining that it's not the medical term, but Dr. Copes has done a far better job than I could ever think of doing. So having set that clear, that what we typically receive at the WSIB would not fit within the medical definition of a disease cluster, barring the infectious disease cases that I can think of, SARS, not too long ago, and that we, continue to receive infectious disease clusters for smaller outbreaks. But within the context that we're discussing today, the outbreaks or the cases, the cluster cases that we see in the board's day-to-day use of the term refer to a group of occupational disease cases that have some commonality. That can be, there's a single occupational disease in common. So think, back in the late 80s, lung cancer and mining. Think a single exposure agent in common. That would be more currently the McIntyre powders, the cases that we've been dealing with. And in that instance, you have a single agent, but you may have an array of diseases that are being attributed to that agent. Or you have a single occupation, for example, firefighters, and entitlement is prescribed by presumptive legislation. So, or an employer or community concern. And that would be, back in, I remember working with Dr. Genesov on some of this, in Sarnia, the Holmes Foundry years back, but more recently, the GE Peterborough cluster that we're seeing. And the clusters of this kind, not the medical definition of clusters, can pose are the most complex for us to adjudicate. And because the jobs performed and the related exposures are wide-ranging and span many years, and often with significant changes in the work processes and in the environments over time. And also, there's typically an equally wide array of conditions that are being attributed to these workplaces. So we've come to call those clusters, and I think that probably is true of most of us in this room. And basically, there's something that arises, within a similar time period, concern in the community, and usually it's preceded by an event that raises awareness in a particular worker community. So it's well established, as we've heard today, that occupational diseases are underreported. Dr. Demers' recent work on the burden of occupational cancer has confirmed this for all of us, and I think you heard some of that this morning. We know that occupational cancers and diseases reported to the board don't fully represent the occupational disease burden in the community. Triggering events that can lead to raised awareness with occupational disease can include a change in policy or law. So think, the firefighter presumptive regulations in 2007 and beyond, or new science that points to a previously unrecognized workplace hazard. So, think back to asbestos years ago, but perhaps nanoparticles in the future, based on what we've been hearing today. Often it can be a media profile on a particular health concern. So a few years ago, the Toronto Star ran an article about junior forest rangers and other forestry workers who were involved in spraying of herbicides back in their youth. And these individuals that were profiled expressed health concerns about what they were experiencing today, and they attributed back to what was known as Agent Orange. I can tell you that within days and weeks of that story, we received an influx of claims for a range of illnesses, all of which were attributed to the spraying of these herbicides. So that greatly increases awareness equals claim submission. Or a clinic can be held by labor in a particular community or workplace, and that's some of the work that we've done, many in this room have been involved in. So in recent years, the clinics that were organized by labor, and many of you in this room, have been especially effective in raising awareness about occupational disease. They've usually been a response to an expression of health concerns by workers in a particular industry or workplace. Sadly, sometimes it's been the family members of these workers who've been leading forward those concerns. Unions like Unifor and the steelworkers have worked with other health and safety partners, the Office of the Worker Advisor, OCAL. Last year we saw clinics in Timmins and Sudbury for the McIntyre powder concern. An information event was held in Peterborough this past spring that related back, or was still addressing some of the concerns that were first initiated in a clinic that was held in 2004. Over the years, there have been other clinics in Sault Ste. Marie for Algoma workers and in Kitchener for the rubber industry in that location. The board has very much appreciated the opportunity that's been offered to us by the organizers to participate in these events. And on those several occasions where I was fortunate enough to be included or to attend on behalf of the board, I found that our participation was valuable, not only to facilitate the submission of claims, but also to, on site, address concerns from workers who had existing claims. So what's the board's approach to clusters of this kind? The clusters are an important part of the work that we do in the OCT-Disease and Survivor Benefits Program, which is now within the Complex Case Claims Division at the board. Central to the board's management of these disease clusters is the importance that we give to continuing the engagement with our systems partners. To move forward the work that's been initiated at these clinics, the board has participated in working groups with the different organizers, Unifor, Steelworkers, Office of the Worker Advisor, OCAL, and MOL in some instances more lately. So together we've worked on the ways to facilitate the submission of claims and to expedite the adjudication or reconsideration of some previously denied claims, as we're dealing with in GE right now. Within the board, the way we deal with these clusters is we establish a specialized and dedicated team, a multidisciplinary team, to look at determining the entitlement in these cases. The dedicated team includes very highly experienced adjudicators. They've all received training in occupational disease, and generally there are more senior adjudicators who've come over to do this specialized work. The team is also supported by our occupational hygiene professionals who have expertise pertaining to industrial processes and occupational exposures, and their work is very important to the adjudication of the claim in reconstructing past exposures, particularly those that are most complex and long ago, sometimes involving processes that no longer exist. In addition, the team has access to physicians who specialize in occupational medicine and can review and interpret the more complex medical questions that the adjudicators need on medical issues. And finally, we have scientists who review the scientific literature to find the evidence that's supporting, causal link between the certain types of exposures that present themselves in these clusters and the various health concerns that come forward. So this work is always, of course, subject to management oversight. It has profile, as you can imagine, but as is our work generally. With each cluster, we develop a desktop tools to help the staff and management track and report on the progress. You heard from Minister Flynn that he's very interested in this work and checks in with us daily. I wouldn't say that frequently, perhaps, but we are obviously mindful of the broader context and are doing our best to report faithfully on this work. The goal of the dedicated team, essentially, though, is to ensure that we have the quality and the consistency of decision-making that we most value in this work. So the clusters have been a feature of our work for many years. The only thing I can say that is always true is that customization of the approach that we take to these clusters is key, because there's no one-size-fits-all. Each cluster presents a different set of circumstances, a different set of conditions, a different set of everything. And so it's important that when a cluster appears, that the adjudication and hygiene team work together to assemble as much employment and exposure information as they can about the particular workplace. This can include getting union records, historical information from the employer, or other similar industries if that employer is no longer available, Ministry of Labor records, essentially assembling as much as we can about that workplace and the exposures. As long latency occupational diseases often occur decades after the exposure has taken place, this is our particular challenge. So I can't emphasize enough for the group, the members of this audience, and many of whom are labor and employers, the importance of maintaining good employment records at all levels. Whether that be at the worker, individual level, I think it's important that all workers keep a good record of where they work and what they've done. Unions as well. You know, we've heard sometimes, well, we had these records, but we ran out of space and we disposed of them. That's rather heartbreaking for our adjudicators and hygienists, and as well for employers, you know, that they need to, it would be important to have records that we can draw on because we are often working to reconstruct the past. Having said all this, at the case level, we apply the same adjudication approaches and principles to disease clusters that we do to all occupational disease claims. And most important is that all inquiries have to begin with the injured worker or the surviving spouse. There's nothing that can be generally true about anyone. Each person's history has to be inquired and explored as fully as possible. So it's critical that the adjudicators begin with the worker side, and you know, and I could give you all the details, but I know the audience I'm dealing with, I'm sure you're aware of the kind of information that we need to gather to establish the exposures. But I do want to emphasize that it's the adjudicator that bears the responsibility of gathering that information to decide the claim fairly. So sometimes we hear that that's put onto workers. I want to emphasize that in our program, it's most important that we take the time to speak to the worker, that we hear from him what work, not how he thinks his condition might be work-related, because that's not, you know, we often have a worker come forward and indicate, well, I think that my disease is due to asbestos, or I think that my, you know, condition is due to exposure agent ABC. But as we explore more fully, it can and learn about the work process, it can be an agent that he or she never thought to identify or bring forward. So it's important that we not only look in the direction that we're pointed, that we do listen and look in the direction we're pointed, but that we be the professionals that we need to be and look more broadly and comprehensively at the full spectrum of the work that was performed and look for the causal relationships that would be present. So I will skip all the detail there. And when all the information is obtained and we know from the worker where he or she worked, we've corroborated that with the employer or with other sources, then it's time for making the decisions. And when it comes to the decision making, the decision follows the usual process. We look to the law, that would being the Workplace Safety Insurance Act. We look to the schedules within that act. We look to policy, or absent any of these, then we take case-by-case approach and look for the best available evidence that can help inform and decide that claim. So I've attempted to outline the WSIB context for occupational disease clusters, including an observation that these clusters have served an important purpose, which is to raise the awareness of occupational disease. It's clear, however, to the WSIB and to everyone in this room that we need to continue to work together to address the underreporting of occupational disease, not only to bring compensation to those who've been harmed, but also at a very basic level to help increase the awareness. Each claim that's allowed is a government-level recognition of an occupational disease, and obviously we can only prevent the hazards that we recognize. Events like today, with its focus on occupational disease, form part of that broader conversation that we all need to continue within our respective spheres. Thank you.